In today's interview, I talked to Maria Reich. Maria is a certified canine nutritionist, co-owner of the Pet Health and Nutrition Center, and author of the book 1,000 Lifetimes, The Story of a Woman and Her Dog, Both Sides of the Tale. Her book is a memoir of her life with rescue animals, in particular a dog named Celeste. Celeste was deaf and also had several health problems. Maria worked with professional animal communicators to better connect with Celeste and help her live the best life possible. When writing the book, when going through everything, let's start with just the pets. The years of having pets with your husband and then writing the book about it, what was that like for you? Was that an intense experience?
Oh, yeah. There were times when I would write consistently, and then there were periods where I put it down and I didn't touch it for a long period of time. Writing it, I'm so glad I did, because all the good things, I could go back and I can live those moments again. I can reread and I can be there. And even the things that, life is up and down for all of us. My mom always says, nobody skates. I don't care how much money you have or how beautiful you may be or whatever. Tragedies happen to all of us. And so even in the hard times, there's a lot of beauty to life. So yes, writing it, having a permanent record of these things, of this really important time in my life with so many wonderful beings I was privileged to share it with. It was really wonderful. But yes, it was hard. It's hard work to write a book.
What would you say kept driving you to write it? What kept you going with it?
I consider that book the biggest purpose of my life. When I was little, I said a prayer that I wanted when I grew up to write a book that had to do with animals. That would be a really great book. That was a goal I set when I was like 8 years old. I was a big reader since I was little. It was definitely the fulfillment of that desire. But Celeste brought me, her life experience was intended to be shared with others. So I had to get that down. So even when I had my brain aneurysm and I had the choice, did I want to come back or did I want to leave? And leaving is easier than living, honestly. But it is. And I knew I had to keep going because I hadn't finished the book. That was my biggest, most important job I felt in life. Celeste had messages, more than one, that she wanted people to know. And it was my responsibility to get that out. And that is what kept me going, even when I just was like, oh, I can't do this. And every night when I sat down to write, every single time I sat down to write, I said to myself, you're fooling yourself. You're not good at this. You can't do this. And then that's how I would start. So I'd tell myself that I just couldn't do it. And then I did it. Then I sat down and I start writing.
With Celeste, it's so true that she does experience a lot of health issues. All along, it sounded like there would be periods where it got a little bit calmer. And it ultimately seemed like it was neurological a lot of the time. Can you tell what you learned about neurological issues with dogs from her?
I want to stress that the physical is important, and people will learn things through the process of the story of things that they might go, oh gosh, I didn't know that. Oh, maybe I should change this thing for my dog, or maybe I shouldn't do this thing, or maybe I should. But at the end of the day, the most important thing for Celeste is always going to be the emotional. It's always going to be that higher calling for the humans in the relationships to be better. And when I mean be better, listen to your dog. Hear what they're telling you. See them for who they are, not for who you think they are. There's lots of people who have pets and they have an image of what a dog is. And then they squeeze their dog into the image. And their dog is basically an accessory to their own life. What they're not understanding is your dog has his own life, separate and apart from you. And that they need to be honored, respected, seen, and heard for who they are and what their desires are as much as possible to make their lives as happy as we possibly can. And so for Celeste, a big part of the message is when she was having difficulty, especially when initially there was starting to be some accidents and stuff, I immediately recognized my dog was having difficulty, that this wasn't a spite, which dogs can't do anyway. People don't understand that. They don't do things for spite. Or that she just was defying me, or these kinds of things. Mm-hmm. She was struggling. So if I asked her to do something and she didn't comply, it wasn't because she was like, well, a big middle finger to you, I'm going to go do my own thing. She's like, I'm not sure what you want, or this is scary for me. And these are the things that that's the more important aspect of the message for her. The physical aspects were how much damage we do just doing the status quo. Slamming animals with vaccines, even when they already have immunity, over and over and over again. I'm not an anti-vaxxer, but they're not innocuous either. So when we vaccinate, we really have to figure out, what am I vaccinating for? What is the potential that my dog contracts this problem? What is the seriousness if they do? And then how effective is the vaccine? Because not all vaccines are effective. And so I see people, they go to the vet and they get these cocktails of vaccinations over and over, even though sometimes there's one bacteria in their virus, whatever, that dogs can't actually contract after 6 weeks of age. So why is it in there? Then there's leptospirosis vaccine. Well, that's a pretty tough one on the body. Most dogs will never see that in their entire lives. And it's 100% curable by antibiotics. As long as you're paying attention to your dog, you're going to see your dog get sick. You're going to go to the vet. The vet's going to give you antibiotics, and your dog should be okay. Depending upon, of course, the other factor is, are you poisoning your dog every month with flea and tick control? Because that's going to damage their kidneys and their liver. So your dog is compromised. So when they contract some kind of an illness, the likelihood that they may have trouble goes up if their body is compromised by the other things that people routinely do. Poor quality food increases inflammation in the body. Inflammation is the enemy. Inflammation can cause a myriad of cascading health disorders. So yes, although these things are important and they, again, rolled out in a story format, so it's not an instruction booklet, but people will read stuff and be like, oh, I didn't know that. And here I thought I was doing like this good thing for my dog, but maybe I need to research it a little more. Maybe I need to understand it. So just easily with vaccines, distemper and parvo, once your dog establishes immunity, the science is pretty clear. They hold it for life. So revaccinating them doesn't make sense for diseases that they're protected against. And quite frankly, at the end of the day, those are the most important ones for dogs, because distemper and parvo are prevalent in the environment. And if you don't vaccinate your dog and give them protection for that, there's a good possibility they may get one or both of these diseases, and they have high mortality rates. And if animals survive, they have high side effects that can linger for the rest of their lives. But if you're informed, you can protect them and take the minimal risk of vaccinating a couple of times instead of the chronic risk of, oh, we're going to do this every year or every 3 years, which is equally, the 3-year vaccine is equally as arbitrary as the every year vaccine. So people think, oh, well, my vet's only vaccinating every 3 years. He's doing a great job. Well, that's arbitrary too. You'd probably find out your dog didn't even need those vaccines. So the health issues are important, but at the end of the day, remember the relationship is really the most important. And I look around nowadays and the chronic, almost epidemic use of shock collars on dogs is so distressing to me, because it is such a violation of your commitment to your companion animal. I feel like if you can't do it to a 2-year-old human, then you can't do it to a dog. And if we hold that high standard, then we will use this massive gray matter that we have to find ways to help our dogs to live comfortably and happily in a very crazy human world that we live in, and not be taking shortcuts that actually damage your relationship, because shocking somebody is torture. So if you tortured me, I'd probably do what you want, but I certainly wouldn't be feeling warm and fuzzy about you.
I've seen some trainers where they will say that these dogs would be euthanized if I didn't use, I guess it's more of a choke collar or something like that, and that the only way that they can get to a level where they wouldn't be euthanized is to give them a deterrent rather than just a reward. What do you think about that?
I totally get that. And the reality is that they've been proven wrong. That there are many trainers out there that rehabilitate dogs using totally different means. I don't want to say punitive. I mean, it's important to let a dog know that that's not really going to get you what you want. But dogs respond to pressure. So like with my own dogs with leash training, a little tiny bit of pressure on a flat collar and then bring them back. I know you're talking about dogs who are way over the top, but sometimes these dogs are way over the top because they've been conditioned with violence. So a lot of times people get these big, strong, vicious, well, for instance, my dog Toby, right? He came to me loaded with scars. He was obviously fought and quite abused. And this dog is one of the best dogs I've ever seen. He really wants to do what you want him to do, which is not true of a lot of dogs. And he's very loving. And when I first got him, and he would see another dog when we'd be out walking, he would do the spinning and he would ramp himself up. And I worked with him for every single day it took about 6 months. I worked entirely with the flat collar, just taught him how to cope with these other things and to self-control, really, to keep his energy down and to understand I don't have to go there. I don't have to be in that place. When we teach animals better ways to do things, they're usually really happy to go to find that groove. It's more comfortable for them not to be escalated in their emotional response. It takes more time. Okay. And that's the thing. If you put a shock collar on a dog, 9 times out of 10, probably higher than that, you can get him to adjust his behavior very, very quickly. But you didn't really change his emotional state. You didn't get him to think, well, that thing that was really hyping me up isn't hyping me up anymore. It's just you've added more anxiety, but I'm kind of containing it so that you don't really get to see the outward manifestations of how out of control that dog may be actually feeling. So you got to change their mind about things, and they're usually pretty willing. Every once in a while, you may have an animal that you can't get through. I don't know. I mean, I would check with Best Friends Animal Society, which I've been a member of for a long time, and they take in animals that would otherwise not be able to be rehomed, because you can't put a dangerous animal out into society where they may do serious damage to somebody or somebody's pets. So they do have animals there. Most of them are adoptable, but they do have a certain amount of animals there that cannot be adopted for various reasons. And they don't shock them, and they don't put them on choke collars and prong collars and stuff. So there is a way to do this without having, we do these things to our dogs because we can get away with it, right? So if this was a killer whale, it would just eat you. I mean, when we're dealing with animals like killer whales, they don't use punitive measures on killer whales because that's going to get you chewed up pretty quick. So we do it on dogs because we can get away with it. It's expedient, it's fast, it gets us the results we want. We look good. Oh, look what I could handle, right? I could take this crazy dog and turn him into this dog who can control himself around these things. But you've damaged any potential for the deep, meaningful relationship that you could have. And you haven't become the better human. You've actually taken yourself, in my opinion, down. And a lot of people are going to hate me for this. And I do realize that, but I don't care because they wouldn't like me anyway. But in my estimation, human beings who decide to use violence when they work with each other, when you're dealing with other humans or you're dealing with other animals, are not enlightened beings and are not doing humanity or the other animals any great service.
So shifting gears, there's a lot of relationships in the book with different animals in your life, but obviously the Celeste story is the big story. And like you said, that was the driving force behind writing it. One of the aspects that seems to have developed for you with your relationship with Celeste was a spiritual journey. Tell me about how that developed.
The initial reason why I had Celeste was because we were driving to the shelter, ostensibly to donate some items. And on the way, and I did not want another dog. I had Cody, who was 13 at the time. I had 3 cats. Like I said, we had many, many more animals, but over time, this is where we were now. 3 cats and an older dog. And I was tired. On the way down there, I'm thinking to myself how I am not getting another dog. So it's not happening. Not going to let Phil out of the car when we get there. There's just no way. I'll drop this stuff off. I'll come home. And I get this message loud and clear, just as if somebody had said it out loud, there will be a deaf dog. And so our beginning together started with something out of the ordinary. I'm not what I would consider a woo-woo person. I don't walk around saying I see all kinds of different things and whatever. I'm a very, what you see is what you get, Long Islander. And so I was totally shocked. Totally shocked. I was as shocked as anybody would be. And I look over at my husband because it was so loud and clear. He had to have heard it. And he obviously had not heard anything. So now I continue the drive arguing about how I can't have a deaf dog because of, where we're living and da-da-da-da-da. First dog we see is Celeste. She's outside in one of the fenced areas outside. And this is a shelter we'd volunteered at. And I went in and I asked Jean, the volunteer of the day who I knew, basically that we were thinking maybe we'd get another dog. And I give her this whole spiel on the perfect dog, comes when called, barks when something's there, but then stops barking when you tell him to, never chews anything, never, blah, blah, blah. Like, doesn't pull on the leash. And she just looked at me so sadly and she said, we have no dogs like that here. And then I said, well, what about the white one? And she said, oh, she's deaf. And I thought, oh my God, there's my dog. There's my dog, And so I said, well, let me see her. And the second we touched each other, it was like, oh my God. And I waved Phil out of the car and I said, this is my dog, And so it was meant to be. And so during our spiritual journey, there was a lot of different things. And we moved into animal communication. And that was just amazing, the information that I was able to get from my different animals. But Celeste she herself was on a higher spiritual plane. So she was aces at animal communication, like from the get-go. Her telepathic connection to me was so strong. And so it just went from there.
The other aspect that went along with that was a really interesting part of the book, was the animal communicators that you worked with. At first, you worked with one. Then you worked with one who became a very close friend of yours, Carol.
Yeah, I was always intrigued about it because here's the thing that I've always thought about. Animals have thoughts, right? That's anybody who lives with them knows they think about all kinds of things. We don't always know what they're thinking about, but it's clear that they're thinking about things. And you'll watch them think about something and then do something that they were contemplating that act before they actually did it, right? And thoughts are energy. So energy can be picked up. And even our own government believes that telepathic communication is real. They've done research on it because they're trying to tap into this ability for the minds to talk to the minds kind of thing. So I think some people are really good at picking up the messages. The things that people trip over is they're thinking, well, my dog doesn't speak English. Well, no, your dog does not speak English. But the person who is getting the information does. If we consider babies, little babies do not have language, but they have thoughts. What happens with humans is at some point in our early development, our thoughts become automatic. They become translated into language. And over time, that becomes automatic for us. So the words that I'm saying to you, the letters on the piece of paper, don't really in and of themselves have any meaning, but we've assigned them meaning. So we automatically transfer everything we're hearing into words. That's what we do now. But we didn't when we were very little. We still had thoughts. We just didn't translate them. So with an animal communicator, the animal's having thoughts. They're picking up the thoughts, and their brain automatically just translates it into language, because that's what we do. That's how our minds are structured now. And so I think when people understand that, they'll understand it more. I think the concept that the animal communicator is getting, that the dog is saying, well, I went for a walk yesterday. No, the dog is sending the impression that they went for a walk, and this is what they and the animal communicator is automatically, and I don't think a lot of them even understand that that's actually what their mind is doing. But that's how we understand reality with language. What was really astounding to me with Callaway was, like, my dog Cody had degenerative myelopathy, and that's a neurological disorder where the nerves start to break down, the myelin sheath breaks down, nerves become exposed, and they start to die. And it starts with symptomatic at the hind back legs and the feet. and it will slowly work its way up the leg. So what happens is eventually the animal doesn't have the feeling in there. Like they don't know where their back end is anymore because the connection from the brain to the feet is interrupted. So he was still able to walk, but it was much slower. He would knuckle under. People who have dogs with DM understand what that means when the foot turns under and they don't realize it's in the wrong position. Like if you take a normal dog and you turn his foot under, he will immediately pull it back. There'll be no lag time. A dog with DM, depending upon the level of DM, will either move it back after a little bit slower, or they may not move it back at all. The first thing that Callaway said to me when she tapped into Cody, and I had not told her about his problem, was, is there something wrong with his hind end? I can't get a sense of it. That he's basically showing me he's not sure where that is. And I thought, wow, that's pretty amazing. How did she get that? Now, understand that Callaway was in Virginia and I was in Florida. So it wasn't like she was looking at this dog. She could not see him. She'd never seen him. She'd never met him. But she immediately got that impression. She couldn't feel the back end of this dog. It was that was my first introduction to animal communication, and everything was so dead on. She talked to all the animals I had at the time. And every single one, and this is the thing about animal communication I find really interesting, just like people, every animal has its own unique personality. My cats, each cat was completely different from the other one. Celeste and Cody were, so different. They were practically different species. And when I would get messages from each individual one, it was clearly, oh, that's exactly what I would expect that particular one to say. So I thought that was really fascinating. Plus, they all had things that they had to say that were very obviously relevant for each one of them. Because they care about different things. Just because you have two dogs doesn't mean that both dogs like to swim. Every animal has different things that are important to them. Oliver wanted to talk about one thing, and Lacey wanted to talk about something else, and Titch wanted to talk. It was really amazing. And then I was totally hooked because it was so great. And then we had the issue with the toads, where Celeste was in Florida. They have something called Marinas toads. They were imported from Brazil. They're highly toxic, incredibly damaging to the environment. Were originally brought in because of the sugar plantations. They wanted to control beetles that damage the sugar. Unfortunately, again, human hubris, these animals spread all over the state of Florida and into some of our southern states, and they secrete a toxin. And if your dog grabs these toads, this toxin gets secreted. It creates tremendous burning. It's hotter than the hottest peppers on earth. So they have this tremendous pain and burning in their mouth, and then they can start to seizure. The smaller the dog, the more dangerous it is. The amount of toxin makes a big difference. And so lots of dogs actually do die from grabbing onto these toads. And so Celeste had gotten a hold of a toad right at the end of our driveway, and we had run into the house and we threw it in the tub and we started washing her mouth out. We got to dilute this poison. And then we threw her in the car and we took her to the emergency vet, at which point she went under the table, under the chair, and every tooth was showing. And she was like, don't you come close to me, because now she's terrified. And Celeste and I had at this point, I had her for about, I think, 6 or 7 months. And she had very soft ears, and very, she was just the softest dog. So I'd always pet her head all, and she loved it. All of a sudden, after this episode, I'd go to touch her and she'd snap at me. She never snapped at me. And it was constant. And I thought, what is going on? And obviously she survived the toad episode. So I contacted Callaway. So I explained to Callaway, listen, she has to not grab these toads. This is really, she could die, blah, 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 blah. And so Callaway tapped into Celeste, and she got back to me and she said, she thought you caused the burning. So the chain of events was so close that by the time she really comprehended her mouth was on fire, we were in there working on her mouth. And so she thought, for no apparent reason, these people she loved went completely ballistic and caused her the most pain she'd ever felt in her life. And she was so upset. She didn't know what to do because she thought she finally was in the right place and she was loved and she was safe. And all of a sudden she wasn't safe at all, but she loved me and she didn't know what to do with this. And then she was very concerned every time I put my hand near her head that I was going to do this to her again, which really is a testament to how wonderful dogs are. Because quite frankly, if somebody had caused that kind of pain to me, I'm pretty sure I'd have hauled off and belted them the next time they came close to me. But she didn't bite me. This is what I mean. We get away with a lot with our dogs. We have to really think about, just because we can, should we? So once she understood that it was not me, but it was in fact the toad, all of that behavior disappeared. I could touch her head again. She was so relieved to find out that no, I wasn't some kind of crazed monster sometimes and the loving mommy at other times. And that really helped. She did not concede to not touching the toads. She insisted that she had to get them no matter what. But the compromise we made was that if she grabbed a toad, we would have to go in the house and I would have to immediately wash out her mouth, and I'd have to get a washcloth in there, and I'd have to do the top of her mouth and her tongue and all of that. And she never gave me a problem about it. As a matter of fact, every time and she caught about 50 toads in the time that we were in Florida, just so you know. So it was, she was pretty determined. But she was also really interesting about it. She would now grab them with just her front teeth, just a little bit on the edge, and she'd shake them and she'd drop them, and she'd shake them and she'd drop them. So she didn't put them in her mouth like the first time. But we still had to clean her mouth out because I didn't know how much toxin she might have gotten in there. So it was really interesting because she got to the point where it was like she would grab a toad, she'd do the shaky thing and drop it thing, and then she'd look at me and we'd run in the house and we'd wash at her mouth. When we moved to Connecticut, the toads here are not those toads. And the first time she saw one out here, she grabbed it, and she shook it and she dropped it and she looked at me and I didn't do anything. And then she's just like, so now she starts foaming at the mouth and she's spitting and she's looking at me. And and then I realized, geez, does she think like I don't care if she dies or something? Because these toads aren't. So I did do a session with her so she understood that the toads here aren't toxic and maybe we could leave them alone because there's no need to be killing them.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Oh, it is really interesting because to have that ability to talk to an animal communicator is, I think, what so many owners are missing when they don't have that part. I hear that so much from pet owners. And experiencing it myself over the years, is like where you just want to be able to explain things to them and help them understand I'm trying to help you and I don't want you to be scared, and you just don't feel like you can convey it. Like you feel like they're confused, they're not understanding. And that's such a hard part of being a pet owner, because if it's a child, at least you can explain it. But with a pet,
right,
you feel like all you can do is your best to convey what you're trying to do. So when you add that animal communication aspect, that really does change the whole dynamic.
It does. And what we have to understand is that, and I've had people tell me this, well, they hear me, they know whatever. Okay. I remember Callaway telling me one time she was working with horses, and for whatever reason, all the horses were acting up that day. She finally asked them, what is the problem? And she said essentially what they sent her back was the image of her with like the old boom boxes that I guess in the 80s or so people would, because we didn't have the little pocket things and the earbuds and all that. So they literally carry around these great big radios or whatever and be playing their music. And that's what they were showing. It was because all the stuff in her head was shouting and screaming. And this is because she was having a lot of other issues and she was having a tough day. Carol said to me that for my animals, my brain is like the LA freeway system. There's like all this information going on all the time, and it's just lots of thoughts. And so what they do is they tune us out. So when we're in an emotional place where we want to explain something to our animals, they're getting a lot of, and they are not getting the, okay, listen, mommy needs to do this because this is going to help you in such and such a way. They're not getting any of that. We're so busy in our heads as humans. If you're a meditator, you probably could do this much better. But for most of us, we have a billion thoughts going on. We've got too many things to do, too many stresses and strains, and we can't quiet all the chatter so that we can get clear, concise thoughts to our pets. A good animal communicator, and just like any other profession, they're not all good, so you have to be aware of that. A good animal communicator can very clearly convey a message and quiet brain so that the animal's not being bombarded with a bunch of crazy, but there's more concise thought. Another thing to remember is that just like any communication, it is subject to interpretation. We've all had conversations with people and we said one thing and they heard something different. So when you deal with an animal communicator, it's important to understand, keep your mind open, get your ego out of the way, and try to be able to view what's being said with the understanding of what you know about your companion animal and what you're willing to be open to understanding, because the animal communicator is trying to interpret what she's getting. So she's getting certain things and she's interpreting it based on, or he, based on just what they know in life, what their understanding of things. But you can get things wrong or a little skewed. My dog Star, which, spoiler alert, is Celeste, come back. So my dog Star, I got her an ovary-sparing spay because I didn't want her to have the urinary incontinence that Celeste had in her last lifetime. So I got an ovary-sparing spay, which means that she basically goes through the cycle, but she has no uterus. And so she's still receptive to males, but she can't get pyometra when she gets older, and she can't get pregnant. So as a result of that, she gets the hormone fluxes. And what I found was when she's coming into one of these periods, she's not eating her food. Like, she'll come to the kitchen, I'll put her food together, she'll go like she's going to eat it, and then she smells it and she goes, yeah, I can't eat that. So there's a hormone component that is making the food smell different, and therefore she won't eat it. Well, Carol got that the food doesn't smell. But then I realized, watching her behavior, it smells, it doesn't smell right. So she got, the food doesn't smell, but it was the food doesn't smell right. So sometimes you have to be, and that's not because Carol's not a great animal communicator, she is, but you have to be aware that we're all interpreting stuff. And so just like with human conversation, you can misinterpret things, or you can miss a subtlety, you know. And so I just wanted people to be aware of that. I hope people will find good animal communicators. I always let my dogs know before I go on vacation that I'm going away, that I'll be coming back, who will be taking care of them. When I have to go to the vet, I tell them that we're going to the vet. I let them know different things that will affect their life. If company's coming, who's coming, why they're coming, who they are to us, how long they'll be staying, so that the regular ups and downs and flows of life, it's very, very helpful. I'm always astounded by, I've seen people who've used animal communicators, they'll use them once or twice in their animal's lifetime, and I'm like, why would you not want to let them know any kind of big event? Like if somebody's hospitalized, what's going on? Where did daddy go? What's happening? You're having a new baby. Okay, what's going on? What can you expect from this? How will your life change with this? I find it really interesting that people who even use animal communicators do not use them as much as I think would be beneficial to everybody.
There's another aspect, I think, that's kind of throughout your memoir, and that is your relationship with your husband. How do you think being able to share that with someone, the ups and downs of the pets' lives?
That's a difficult one, because Phil and I have been together for 39 years, and we've been through a lot together. We just fell into the traditional roles of mommy takes care of cleaning up the messes and feeding them, and even a good portion of the training. I do all of those kinds of things. Veterinarian, I do all of that. So with Phil, he cannot stand it if an animal is suffering. It's very, very hard for him. He takes it when things go wrong with them, it really upsets him. And when they pass, it's also incredibly hard for him. I think probably in a lot of people's relationships, it's a mutual hold each other up. For me, it's more like, okay, I have to try to hold myself together and take care of him and whatever the crisis is in front of me. So it's a lot.
People grieve differently, or they experience trauma differently. So even though maybe that is the case in some relationships where they both can kind of lift each other up, but I tend to experience the pain right after they're gone, like extra pain. My husband, we've had a lot of animals with health issues that we've treated for quite some time. And, you know, as the end is approaching, it's just awful for him. Whereas I'm like, they're still here. We're doing our best. And I'm just kind of in the present with it. But then when they're gone, I get that maternal, they're not here anymore. I can't make sure they're okay. I can't take care of them. And then it really hits me. So it's just interesting because different people handle it in different ways and just experience it differently. But sometimes just having the other person there who also loved the animal is at least something.
Sure, you definitely have that. I know one of the things for Phil is, though, he's one of those people that tends to take the reminders of that individual and get them out of the way because he can't take it. In my room, I have a shelf, and it's all dedicated mostly to Celeste, but there's Maya there, and there's Doc there, and Blaze is there, and there's all these memories there, and I need that. I need that. Because at the end of the day, they're not in their bodies anymore, but they're still alive, you know? And that's a truth that I have come to, and I hope, and I found a lot of people who say that my book gave them a lot of comfort. And this is what 1,000 Lifetimes is really, that's the whole purpose of the title. Besides the fact that it says Celeste and I have always been together through every lifetime, is that I'm actually a spiritual being experiencing life as a human being right now. And I happen to be this particular person. But my soul is so much more than that. And when my body goes, my spiritual self will still be alive. Same thing with the animals. And of course for Celeste, because our connection is so intense, our souls are always connected no matter what. And so it's important to realize that although they've left their bodies, they're not dead in the way that we think of death. It's not the end. It's just a transition to another plane. I need to have their things around me and to remember them, the people that I love, the animals that I love. I keep them alive, and I think about them, and some of them you can connect with in a spiritual way. Celeste has been very, very, very present in my life, even when she was out of her body, in so many ways. And that's where it gets into the kind of woo-woo thing where some people just aren't ready to go there yet. If you look at different human beings, and we all know a lot of people that seem to be living very superficial lives. Their intellect, their curiosity, all of these things seem to be pretty, dumbed down. And then you have people like Mother Teresa or Gandhi or whatever. And I don't think you can get there in one lifetime. I think that it takes a soul time to develop and become one of these much more elevated, enlightened Buddhas or Jesus Christ or whoever you want to pick. That's my spirituality. That's my true belief system. And there's been so many things in my own personal life that have affirmed that. While, as I said, I still keep myself very cemented on this plane. When I deal with my business, the Pet Health and Nutrition Center, I am very science-based. There's always this awareness that there's far more to reality than what we actually experience and know. So I kind of balance both of those things. But on a day-to-day basis, you'll find me very much submerged in what's happening in the rainforest right now. And Billy is vomiting. What's creating that, and how do we remedy that? Like, these are the things that I think about regularly. And then in the background is this whole spiritual thing. And every once in a while, I get a lightning bolt that just brings that to the forefront. So I don't want people to think that, I just live in this floaty world that's outside the realm of the concrete,
But I think it's totally possible to be very grounded in the human experience and also be having a spiritual life. I understand the hesitance, absolutely, of sounding woo-woo. I relate to that completely. But if you can be completely logical and scientific and also have this other aspect that you believe and that you feel that you know and that you experience. And so I totally get what you're saying. And I think that is a good thing to discuss and to address, because you are working on a logical, scientific basis a lot of the time, but you also have this other aspect that is a part of your life. And I think that's great.
Yes. They're not mutually exclusive. One can be spiritual and logical at the same time.
Exactly. So I was going to ask you, you mentioned the Pet Health and Nutrition Center, and I know you and your husband started that, and it was kind of throughout your experiences with your own animals and with animals in general. If you just could tell me a little bit about how that started and how that's been going.
1,000 Lifetimes is my baby, but the Pet Health and Nutrition Center is Phil's baby. And Phil has always been interested in health. His mother was a very bad asthmatic and died in her 60s from complications from asthma. And so it was always a very big focus for him, how important health was. And if you didn't have your health, then really nothing else mattered. And so throughout his life, he's always explored ways to take care of his own body and to make himself as healthy as possible. And then as we had various animals, and then inevitably animals would get older, health issues would start to creep up, like Celeste, animals who just had health issues from the get-go. And so then he started to shift his focus to how do we help them. And so he had come up with this concept of the Pet Health and Nutrition Center back in 1999, actually. That was even before we adopted Celeste. But we didn't actually launch it until 2007. He enrolled in a program for master herbalism, and he did a 2.5-year pretty intense study. And master herbalists are basically the precursor to pharmaceutical drugs are herbs. And of course, the big problem economically for pharmaceutical companies with herbal medicine is that you can't patent it. You can't patent it, you can't make billions of dollars off of it. So you've got to Mickey Mouse around with molecules and create unique chemical compounds that you can then patent and whatever. Plants are the original medicine. And so what herbalists do is, master herbalists, is you basically do a lot of anatomy and physiology. And then you have all of these different plant compounds, and you learn all of those, and then how they interact with the body to affect different processes. So it is really like a pharmacist, but you're using plants. And so he went and he got that education because, again, this was his path. And he's really super at what he does. And he created all kinds of formulations to help animals who are struggling with different conditions. Now, we can't treat, cure, heal. There's all these different words we're not allowed to use for what we do. So what we say is we create different formulations to support an animal's own healing potential, depending upon what they're struggling with. And that's the heart of what we do. And we're really good at it.
Have you had any really positive experiences with animals that come to mind with some of the stuff you've done with that?
A woman who's working on our video series, which we recently launched, her dog had laryngeal paralysis. And laryngeal paralysis is a neurological disorder where the nerves in the larynx start to degenerate. And what happens is the larynx then can collapse on itself, and it causes breathing issues, and eventually the animal could potentially suffocate to death. Usually you get some additional neurological issues where you get nerve damage in other parts of the body as well, and eventually the animal succumbs to this. Her dog was a Swiss Mountain Dog Cross, and she came to us with his Loipar. Wow, I think it was like 2016 or 17, and her dog just passed, and he was 18 years old. He should have never made it that long. He was diagnosed, 5 years ago or whatever. We have many, many people who use our supplements whose animals are struggling, and they can see noticeable improvement. Again, you're helping support the animal's own healing potential. We have foundational supplements that actually help feed the cells so that the cells are working at the best potential. It appears that we're doing a lot of good out there. We have DM dogs, degenerative myelopathy dogs, same thing. Some dogs who can go quite a bit longer than you would think. Renal failure is epidemic. And we have many animals who were diagnosed with renal failure that it's been years and they're still going along doing their thing. IMHA, I think we had discussed this in the past, immune-mediated hemolytic anemia. That's a sudden onset disorder where the red blood cells, the body attacks its own red blood cells, and the animal will literally die when they get too anemic. So the organ systems will shut down. Can hit any dog and cats, but it's more prevalent in dogs of any age, of any breed, at any time. There's not a clear understanding of why that is. Vaccines seem to be able to trigger it, but vaccines can trigger any autoimmune disease. So that's one of the reasons why you want to mitigate risk with vaccination and only do what is absolutely necessary to protect your animal, because every vaccine has the potential to trigger an autoimmune response. Allergies, same thing. Allergies and vaccines hand in hand. So we know vaccines, chemical flea and tick control, we've seen that. But then there are others that we're not really sure. There's not a clear line. I had postulated years ago that there must be chemical compounds that are ubiquitous, that are in lots of different things, that for some reason the body picks them up and it's carried in the red blood cells, and the body goes, whoa, whoa, that's an invader, and starts to attack it. And I recently had read something that science is starting to believe the same thing, that there's various chemicals that maybe they're in lawn chemicals, maybe they're in household cleaners, but there must be some things that look similar. And the red blood cells pick them up, and some dogs' immune systems go, whoa, wait a minute, that's a problem. And boom, now you've got IMHA. Now, unlike most autoimmune conditions, which degenerative myelopathy is an autoimmune condition, are not reversible. So you have them for life. IMHA, if you can get your animal through the IMHA, most of them seem to resolve and it's just gone. It can easily relapse if you give them a vaccine or do chemical flea and tick control. That can relapse an animal even if it didn't originally cause the problem. So most vets will tell their people, this dog can't get vaccinated anymore, or that kind of thing. So that's really interesting, and that also plays into something must be being carried by the blood that eventually disappears, and the body calms down and realizes, oh wait, that's not here anymore. We don't have to be killing these things. So it's a very, very interesting and terrifying disorder. Right now, allopathic medicine loses about 80% of the animals that are diagnosed with that. When people find us and implement our protocol alongside the veterinary protocol, the veterinary protocol is designed to suppress the immune system. They're trying to suppress that immune system, and a lot of times they'll also do transfusions if the animals get that, their blood count gets that low. But essentially their protocol is suppress the immune system so that the body can survive until it can start acting normally again. What we do is we help the body survive the onslaught of the drugs by helping to support the organ system that's being adversely affected by the toxicity from the pharmaceuticals, which are necessary. Phil does the research, and I do a lot of independent research on my own. I also work with dogs for years. So I worked in breeding kennels. I worked in boarding kennels. I went to school for canine science. I've done lots of seminars. I've read tons of books. So that's like my passion. Dogs are my passion. And then Phil forced me into the health stuff. And then people ask me questions. I have to find the answers. I have a natural intellectual curiosity about everything. So if something pops up and I don't know, I want to know. And then dealing with different people and doing this for, 15, 16 years now, I'm pretty well versed in what I do, yes.
Is there anything else that you'd like us to cover?
The most important thing you can give your animal is to see them and love them for who they actually are. The next thing, if you can provide them with good healthy food and provide them with good supplementation and avoid the things that are damaging them, then they've got everything. Now they've got it all. But first is your relationship. Second is the health. If you can do both, that's phenomenal. If you are struggling financially and you can't feed a whole food diet and you can't afford a lot of supplements for your pet, there are a few basics that you should do no matter what. You should get joint support in for your dog by the time they're 5 to prevent arthritis when they get older, because you can do that. But again, if you're financially struggling, then honor that animal for who they are. And as long as they are being seen and loved for who they actually are, then that is the most important thing any of us can do.
I really appreciate your time. I really appreciate you doing this.
Thank you for inviting me. That was really, really nice of you.